This is part two, the continuation. So here we have all the documents that we need to submit an offer. I generally like to arrange the contract first on top, followed by the compensation agreement, followed by the exclusive buyer broker, affiliated business, wire fraud, and then the seller's disclosure, and then the HOA disclosure if there is one. But we discussed previously that this agent did not have the seller's disclosure ready just yet. So not every scenario is going to be perfect. So I'm almost glad that we have a bit of a curveball so I can show you what to do when the standard procedure can't be followed. Next, we're going to start actually filling out the forms for this property. And so you'll see with the information that we filled out earlier, most of the work is already done for us actually. Under the buyer, it's already selected. On the buyer 2, it's already selected. Sellers there already. We're there. Listing agents here. We don't know who the title company is, so we're going to leave this blank for now. So you'll see most of this information is pre-filled out. There are a couple things that we want to just make sure it's correct. Number one is the parcel ID. We want to make sure that this is all looking correct. So this here matches what I see here under folio ID 2, so that's good. Property looks right, our information looks right, purchase price looks right. In this case, this buyer is going to put down a $10,000 earnest money deposit, so I'll fill this in here. Listing agent's information is here, and closing date, we are going to do 29-day closing. So I'll put this information here. The buyer's information is all filled out. Make sure that their names are spelled correctly. And then our offer expiration is almost always 48 hours from the time that you submit the offer. But that means, this doesn't mean we hold the offer until tomorrow to submit it, right? Because it would be 48 hours from tomorrow. So it's important that the buyer signs, no matter where we are diligent and submit the offer as soon as we have it in hand. Another reason to be diligent is submitting the offer because you may have other offers that come in, right? If the seller is only negotiating with one offer at a time, only with you, that's a much better scenario to be in versus if you are competing against multiple offers at the same time. As we come down here, the seller's information is listed. Listing information, property includes, this is if you negotiate any kind of furniture or washer and dryer. Normally we do not include the furniture on the contract. Those are things that we can handle outside of the contract itself. That's because this is a legal binding document. In order to have furniture in there, it has to be very, very specific. You have to put the model number of the furniture. But most of the time, this is just for appliances, or if the drapery or water heater is not, or if the water softener is not included, then we would hit property excludes. So in this case, let's just say the washer and dryer we want it to be included. And if you refer to this form under appliance included, it only lists dishwasher, range, and a refrigerator, right? So what the seller is saying, during the showing, I did see a washer and dryer there, but they're saying it's not included in the sale. But let's say we want to negotiate the deal with the washer and dryer in there. If you remove this, and the buyer says to you, hey, we saw the washer and dryer is already there, and they assume it's already included. And then at the closing table, you tell them, hey, yeah, the washer and dryer is definitely included, but then you don't put it in the contract, and it's not listed in the MLS. Guess what? Now you've got to buy a set of washer and dryer for your clients, the buyers. So just make sure you take that extra second. It is to kind of get those little details right. Because I know somebody personally that this happened to her, and she had to write $1,000 out of her own pocketbook to purchase that washer and dryer because the whole time she told her clients, hey, yeah, the washer and dryer is included. So in this case, I'm going to include their washer and dryer because it's not standard as part of the appliances. I'm going to hit autofill. So first thing, autofill, hit save so you don't lose any of your progress. So you can see here, mostly all the information is already filled out here. And so this is where you're going to come in and you're going to start working on the contract itself. A lot of times under realtor remarks, they may put, hey, water softener not included. So you want to make this as, you want to document everything. So under line 24, we're going to put that water softener is not included. So this way the buyer knows, hey, the contract that you signed, here's very clear that it's not included. So let's go down to line 27 under purchase price for $460, and we have a $10,000 good faith deposit, which will be made within 3 days here. Let's say we don't know the title company's information. A lot of times you can leave it blank, but in this case, I'm going to fill it in just for the sake of this training video. Before you submit this offer, you may also want to text the listing agent. So I'm actually going to do that now. And I'm just going to ask her, what is the seller's preferred title company? Because this is going to save us work down the road. So we don't have to come back and fill this out, because the more we do up front, it shows that you're a professional and that you're detail oriented. Because if we ever have to, let's say, go to arbitration or mediation, you want to show that you're a professional in the eyes of your mediators or the jury. So we would, let's say she already just responded back, and we see that it's First American Title, and let's say their address is 123 Main Street, Winter Garden, Florida 34787, and their phone number is 813-123-1233, and then their email address is firstam@gmail.com. So you do want to fill this information, all of it, maybe minus the facts. So in this case, I have a client who is putting 30% down on their loan. So how do we fill out the financing and balance to close? Well, if he's putting 30% down, we know he's financing 70%, right? So 100% minus the 30%, he's down payment, it's left as 70%. So what if you have a client who's putting 5% or 10% down? If they're putting 10% down as a down payment, you would put 90% financing. This escrow money deposit does apply to their down payment, so we'll get to that a little bit later down the road. And then the balance to close, right here on line 42, is always the 30% down minus their good faith deposit. So in this case, I'm going to break out my calculator here. I'm going to take the purchase price of $460,000, and to get 30%, we're going to multiply that by 0.3. So this is going to give me $138,000 as a down payment. And then since we're putting $10,000 down, I'm going to take our 30% down payment and I'm going to subtract $10,000 from it. So that means our balance to close is $128,000 even. What if we have another scenario? Let's say the purchase price is $100,000. They're putting a $5,000 deposit, and they are putting 5% down payment. what's our balance to close? In this case, just for sake of this example in training, again, $100,000 multiplied by 5%, which is 0.05. 5% of $100,000 is 5,000. Okay, they're putting a $5,000 payment. Down, escrow money EMD is minus 5,000. Then it's 0. So in this case, it's 0. And sometimes with VA loans, when they're financing 100%, this can even be a negative. So let's use so this is an example of an FHA. So what if it's VA? I'd say $100,000. Let's say they are financing 100%, but you put a $5,000 EMD. That means that the balance close is actually negative $5,000. Now they're going to have some closing costs associated with it, but let's say their closing cost is only $3,000, and I've seen cases where buyers actually get money back at the closing table because they put a deposit down. But let's say we have a 7-day inspection period, and on day 8, the buyer is saying, I want to back out of the contract. Well, this puts their $5,000 EMD at risk. Of course, they still have the financing contingency, so they can get lucky and maybe get denied for financing. But in this case, this VA buyer would still have $5,000 on the line. Let's continue with the offer. So we're all done with page 1 now. Closing date you see is already filled out from the fields that we put previously. And then now we're down to line 83 where it talks about assignability. Just know that you're always going to check this box here that says may not assign this contract. There will be situations maybe you want this contract be assignable, but that's another discussion for another day. If the buyer is paying cash, you're always going to check 8A if they're paying cash, but since my buyer is purchasing using a conventional loan, I'm going to check box B. We have a 30-day close. So if we put 30-day close, that means that they have until the very, very last day to get financing. But we don't want that. We typically want the buyer to obtain financing at least 2 days before closing. So in this instance, the closing date is the 10th of December, which is 29 days from today because today is the 11th. So since we have a 29-day close, I'm going to put 27 days to obtain financing for conventional. And since it's conventional, I'm going to check this box. And we're going to put the same number here. Pardon me, this box here is for, so if he's getting a 30-year mortgage, you would put 30 years. If he's getting a 15-year mortgage, you would put 15 here. So my buyer's getting a 30-year mortgage. I always leave this box here blank because it really the interest rates fluctuate so much every single day. Line 97, it talks about the timeline and deadline that buyers have in order to apply for financing and make that mortgage loan application. They have 5 days. So far we have 2 important deadlines that has already been stated on this contract. Number 1 is we have 3 days to make the $10,000 deposit. So today is Monday. So let's say on Monday, the seller accepts our offer tonight. Then we have 3 days, 1, 2, and 3. So the buyer would have until Thursday to make the deposit. But what if the contract gets, let's say we go back and forth, and the seller accepts our offer on Friday, and then it's still the same thing. Saturday's day 1, Sunday's day 2, so they would have until Monday to submit that deposit. So it's 3 calendar days, not 3 business days. Same thing with the financing application. They have 5 days. So if they accept our offer today, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, guess what? The 5th day falls on a Saturday. Mortgage companies are not open on a Saturday. So this tells me that by the latest, the buyer would need to contact the mortgage company, submit the paperwork for the initial application the latest by Friday. And this is important because let's say you have 30 days to close on a property, and the buyer doesn't make the loan application to even let the mortgage company know that they need to obtain a mortgage, then you're putting yourself at a disadvantage, because if you have 30 days to close but you don't start until, let's say, day 15, well, on day 15, the mortgage company is just getting the news that, hey, this person needs a mortgage. Then now you've only left the mortgage company with 15 days to process the entire loan, which is almost borderline impossible. And I say borderline because I've had a lender close a loan in 15 to 16 days before. But there's a lot that goes into it, like appraisal, submitting the file to underwriting. So there's a lot that goes in the background. So usually I tell the buyers, as soon as we go under contract, just make that loan application like the following day. Just get that done as quickly as possible, because on a tight 30-day turnaround, the more time you give the lender, the better. Because remember, they only have 27 days to make the loan for financing. So if they don't obtain financing after 27 days, they're out of the financing contingency. So for example, if we're sitting here on day 28 of getting this loan and the loan gets denied, well, guess what? The buyer is going to lose that $10,000 deposit because they no longer have a financing period to protect them. But if on day 27 the mortgage loan officer goes, hey, you guys are denied for financing, then you're fine, because you still have this financing 27-day period to protect you. So this is extremely important because time is of the essence on the contract. And even this is a legal binding document. So if you go to court, even the buyer says, the buyer's failure to use good faith and diligence to obtain the loan during the approval period was considered a default. Well, guess what? If you default, this contract is black and white. So we do not want to put the buyer's money at risk for any reason. So what if on day 27 the lender goes, hey, we just need another 24 hours to hear back from underwriting, but you don't want to put the buyer's $10,000 at risk? Then what do? You communicate with the seller's agent and you ask them to extend the financing period for another 24 hours to protect the buyer's deposit. So that way, if you hear back from the underwriter and they go, nope, you're denied, but because you extended that financing period by another 24 hours, your buyer's money is safe. Let's keep going down to the next page. If the buyer ever asks you what closing costs are paid by the seller or what's paid from, by them, refer to number 9. This breaks down very, very clearly what's paid by each party. Now, this assumes, especially on this side, that this is going to be a financed offer. But if you're not getting a mortgage and you're using cash, of course, there's no loan expenses, right? You're not even required to have the appraisal for a cash deal. So just keep that in mind. But what we are going to fill out under line 154 is we always charge a $5.99 transaction coordinator fee, because the more busy you guys get, we are going to have an in-house closing coordinator to really help you keep track of dates and really process with the paperwork for you, so you guys can just focus on what you do best, which is meeting clients and making offers. But for your first at least 5 to 10 transactions, you guys are going to manage your own transactions because you got to know the ins and outs of what goes into a contract. So after you have that first-hand experience, then you can hand it off. So moving on to line 155, where it talks about title, evidence, and insurance. Essentially, every time you purchase a property, the title company is going to make sure that there's no liens on the property, there's no outstanding dues. They run what we call a lien search, and it's a document that they provide you before closing that says, hey, there's no liens on the property, so that the buyer knows that they're getting a title that's free and clear. So on this typical 30-day closing, we can always kind of leave it empty or put 15 days here, because this gives the title company enough time to provide you with this document and do their lien search. But what if you have a cash deal that is going to close in 13 days? Well, if the property closes in 13 days and you put a title evidence is not due for 15 days, well, guess what? That puts us 2 days after closing, right? So let's say you have a really quick turnaround in a cash deal that closes in 13 days. You may want to put 2 days before the closing date, title evidence is due. So in this case, since it's a 29-day close, I'm just going to put 15 days before closing. So that gives us, the title company 29 days minus 15. So as 14 days before closing, they'll give us title evidence and insurance. Coming down to the next page, we're always going to check this box on the top here on line 168, which is going to let the seller designate the closing agent / title company. And this one box is gonna save your buyer sometimes $2,000-3,000, because it says that the seller is gonna pay for the owner's policy for title insurance. Next, under home warranty, unless this is something that you're actively negotiating for, always check NA. And then special assessments, it really depends, right? If you have because this is another negotiating tactic. Let's say a neighborhood is paving the roads and it's going to cost the homeowner $1,500 in 2024, and they're getting hit with that assessment. You can have two options. Number one is to prorate that assessment or have the seller pay it in full. So of course, if you have the seller pay it in full, then that's to your buyer's advantage, because the seller is going to pay for this assessment even after the buyer takes possession for that year. Most of the time we check this box to make it more fair, but you know what? If you're dealing with an agent who doesn't know what they're doing, you check this box, then that's an advantage to your buyer. But since in this case, I know there's no outstanding assessments to our subject property here at 1001 Minnesota, I'm going to check this box A. Going down to the next page, this talks about homeowner association. This says that you have to execute the HOA disclosure and that you should not fully execute this contract unless you received it. That's why it's important to get that seller's disclosure. The HOA disclosure. This here talks about seller's disclosure. And then here's the biggest one out of this entire video, guys. And we talk about this, and there's a reason why I kind of beat the dead horse and always talk about this property inspection. When people hear the term as-is contract, they assume no matter what happens during the inspection, hey, I'm locked in, I'm buying the property as is. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth. And this is where you get to offer value to your buyer and help kind of help them understand that that's not the case, right? So this essentially says, let's say in this case, we have a 5-day inspection period, which is aggressive because normally we may put 7 days, up to 10 days. But if I'm offering a lower purchase price, I like to put a shorter inspection. So this communicates to the seller that we're serious. We're not going to tie their property up for a long time and have them take it off the market. That if something does fall through during the inspection period, that they're going to know within 5 days. So they're not going to lose a whole lot of time in the market. So let's say the seller accepts this offer, we go under contract, and let's say we do the inspection on day 3, and something comes up like, hey, the plumbing is an absolute mess, it wasn't readily observable. In that case, we have a couple options. Number one is to ask the sellers to fix it. Option B is to get some kind of credit from the seller. If option B is selected, this is my preferred option, by the way, then I would get a professional plumber to go out there to the property and give me a quote. Hey, to fix this, to fix this plumbing, it's going to be $10,000. Then in that case, I have a written quote that I can go to the seller and say, hey, this is going to cost us $10,000, so this is why we're requesting $10,000 in closing cost. And this, most importantly, prevents any delays to the closing. Because what if the plumber can't go out to the property for 2 months? We don't want to hold up the closing either, right? Because since in this case we're only offering $460 on basically a $475 property, the more hurdles, the more challenges we can solve up front, the better and easier for the buyer and the seller. But option C, if we can't come to an agreement, and this is why I love this contract, is that if the buyer determines in the buyer's sole discretion that the property is not acceptable to the buyer may terminate this contract by delivering written notice. So text, email, preferably email. So again, option C, I call this the eject button. If we can't come to an agreement, or if the buyer just straight up changes their mind completely and they just don't want this property anymore, within 5 days they can get out of this contract for any reason at all, even if the inspection is perfect. Like, guys, I can't stress this enough. A lot of times the buyer feels like if they put in an offer and it gets accepted, they're locked in. But this contract, if you explain it to them correctly, it'll help them understand, no, you're not locked in at all. You have 5 days to basically cool off, and if you change your mind, you can cancel this property for any reason. So again, it says in buyer's sole discretion for any reason at all. So while we're talking, the seller's agent actually texted us back. So we're going to come in here and just fill this out. So they're using this company here. So the name is Frank Idson Law, and then the closing agent is Cindy Idson. Phone number is 407-245-2887. They even put the address here, so I'm doing a little copy and paste action, and then even the email. I'm going to hit save. All right, so this looks a lot better now. We have all the pertinent information. And after the inspection clause, we're just about done for the contract. So even though it's, contract is 13 pages, the first 5 is really what matters. So you can see here, this is all standard verbiage in the contract. There's nothing for us to fill in here. So this is very important as we get down to 19. To check other, because we do have a compensation agreement, seller to buyer broker. So in this case, this gets cut off a little bit, so I'm going to put everything on this box. Seller to buyer broker. And then if you have a HOA disclosure, this is where you would check the HOA disclosure. But in this case, I don't have one, so I'm going to take that out. If it's a VA or FHA, there is a different form that you have to attach to this, but for the sake of this one, it's not applicable. If my buyer had a property for sale, I would, check this. And by the way, guys, if you don't check this box here, that means that that form is not attached to this contract. If it's not checked, even if you send it a PDF separately to the listing agent, well, guess what? It's not in the contract, so it doesn't exist. Under additional terms, let's say we wanted closing costs for the buyers. Then we would put seller to credit buyer $5,000 towards buyer's closing costs and or prepaid. So this is the exact wording that you guys need to use. So this is a good case of like the buyer wants some extra money to be able to use towards a mortgage rate buy down, or if he wants to just bring less cash to the table. So we talked about this previously. All that matters is what the seller is going to put in their pocket at the end of the day. So if I adjusted this offer for $465, but we're asking for $5,000 back, that gets us back to the $460. But just be cognizant that now this changes these numbers, right? Because now the purchase price is different. So where I'm at $465, multiply by the amount he's putting down, just 30%. Now I have $139.5, which is a 30% of the purchase price, minus 10. So the numbers change. Instead of 128, well, now we're on 129.5. So just be very cognizant anytime you make an adjustment to the purchase price that it changes all these numbers. So going back down to the last page of the contract, my buyer's not asking for any closing costs, so I'm going to take this out. Nobody really puts the buyer's address for purpose of notice, so you can leave this out. When you guys fill out the contract, you'll put your name and mine on there. So for example, you'll put, so let's say Luis, you're doing a contract and you put Luis Garcia / Daniel Shea, and then we're at eXp Realty. And then since there's a co-listing agent on this one, you'll put Maria Van Warner / Andrea Parashopite. And she has a title as a PA, so I'll include that on there, and then we hit save. So now we're done with the as-is contract. We're going to hit save. Especially for your first couple times, you may want to go back and just make sure you have everything correct. So once you're done, hit the save button here, and then you hit back. Now we're going to move to the compensation agreement. And I'm going to cut the video right here, and we'll start part 3 next.